Have you ever wondered what it truly costs to think for yourself? In a world where conformity is rewarded and independence is feared, stepping away from the crowd isn't just difficult, it's dangerous. Yet Niccolo Machiavelli understood something most people refuse to acknowledge. The herd mentality isn't just a social phenomenon, it's a prison. And those who dare to break free don't just gain independence, they gain power that the masses can never touch. But here's the terrifying truth. Leaving the herd comes with a price so steep that most people choose slavery over freedom. They'd rather live safely within the boundaries of collective thinking than face the brutal reality of standing alone. What they don't realize is that this choice doesn't just limit their potential, it hands complete control of their destiny to those who understand the game. The moment you step away from the crowd, everything changes. The comfortable illusions that kept you safe begin to crumble, and suddenly you're forced to confront truths that the herd has spent their entire lives avoiding. You realize that most of what you believed was carefully constructed to keep you compliant, manageable, and predictable. The systems, the beliefs, the very foundations of society aren't designed for your benefit, they're designed to harvest your energy while keeping you docile. This awakening is both liberation and torment. Freedom isn't the pleasant escape most people imagine. It's a harsh teacher that demands you take full responsibility for every aspect of your existence. No more blaming circumstances. No more following orders without question. No more hiding behind the collective decisions of the group. When you leave the herd, you become the sole architect of your reality, and that responsibility can be overwhelming. Machiavelli knew that independent thinkers represent the greatest threat to established power structures. Why? Because they refuse to accept predetermined narrative. They question everything, trust nothing at face value, and worst of all, they inspire others to do the same. This is why every system of control has mechanisms designed to punish those who stray too far from accepted thinking. The isolation isn't accidental, it's engineered. When you first begin to separate yourself from collective thinking, the response is predictable. Your family becomes concerned about your new perspectives. Your friends start to distance themselves, uncomfortable with conversations that challenge their comfortable assumption. Colleagues begin to view you with suspicion, uncertain whether you can still be trusted to follow unspoken rules. This social pressure isn't random. It's the immune system of the herd, designed to pull you back into line. But those who persist discover something remarkable. The very isolation that initially feels like punishment becomes your greatest source of strength. Without the constant noise of group consensus, you begin to hear your own thoughts clearly for the first time. Without the pressure to conform, you start making decisions based on your actual interests rather than what others expect. Without the safety of collective responsibility, you develop the kind of self-reliance that makes you truly dangerous to those who profit from your dependence. The psychological transformation that occurs when you leave the herd is profound and irreversible. You begin to see patterns that were invisible when you were part of the crowd. You notice how easily masses are manipulated through fear, how quickly they abandon principles when threatened, how desperately they cling to leaders who promise to think for them. This clarity comes with a price. You can never again participate in collective delusions with the same innocence. Machiavelli understood that independent thinking isn't just about intellectual freedom, it's about power. When you refuse to accept predetermined conclusions, you force others to defend their positions with actual reasoning rather than social proof. When you question authority instead of blindly following it, you shift the power dynamic in every interaction. When you make decisions based on your own analysis rather than popular opinion, you become unpredictable and therefore difficult to control. This unpredictability is your greatest weapon. The herd operates on consensus and predictable responses. They follow scripts, react to stimuli in expected ways, and make decisions based on what they believe others expect. But someone who has left the herd operates from a different framework entirely. They can't be easily categorized, manipulated, or controlled because they don't follow the standard programming. However, this power comes with constant vigilance. The forces that benefit from herd mentality don't simply ignore those who break free. They actively work to neutralize them. Sometimes this happens through direct confrontation, but more often it's subtle. Character assassination, social isolation, economic pressure, or simply being dismissed as crazy or dangerous. The goal is always the same: to make the cost of independence so high that others will choose conformity. The most insidious attack on independent thinkers isn't external, it's internal. Doubt becomes your constant companion. When everyone around you accepts certain truths without question, and you alone see problems with those truths, it's natural to wonder if you're the one who's wrong. This is where many people break and return to the safety of collective thinking. The psychological pressure of standing alone against widespread consensus can be overwhelming. But Machiavelli teaches us that this doubt, while painful, is actually evidence that you're thinking correct. The herd doesn't doubt because they don't think, they simply accept and follow. Doubt is the price of consciousness, the tax you pay for mental freedom. Those who learn to live with uncertainty while continuing to think independently develop a kind of psychological strength that makes them virtually immune to manipulation. The economic implications of leaving the herd are equally significant. Most career paths, business opportunities, and financial systems are designed around predictable, conformist behavior. When you refuse to play by established rules, traditional paths to prosperity may close. This isn't accidental. Economic dependence is one of the most effective tools for maintaining social control. If questioning the system threatens your livelihood, most people will choose financial security over intellectual honesty. Yet those who persist often discover that independence, while initially costly, opens doors that conformity never could. When you're not bound by conventional thinking, you can see opportunities others. When you're not afraid to challenge established practices, you can innovate in ways that create genuine value. When you're not dependent on institutional approval, you can take risks that lead to extraordinary reward. The key is learning to monetize your independence rather than being victimized by it. This requires developing skills, building relationships, and creating value in ways that don't depend on institutional gatekeeper. It means becoming so competent and valuable that your unconventional thinking becomes an asset rather than a liability. This transition from vulnerability to strength is what separates those who successfully leave the herd from those who simply become isolated outcasts. Machiavelli also understood that leaving the herd doesn't mean becoming antisocial. It means becoming selectively social. Instead of accepting all social connections as equally valuable, you begin to distinguish between relationships that enhance your growth and those that drain your energy. Instead of trying to be accepted by everyone, you become highly selective about whose approval actually matters. This selectivity extends to information consumption as well. The herd typically accepts information from approved sources without critical analysis, but independent thinkers develop sophisticated filters for evaluating information based on logic, evidence, and potential bias rather than source authority. They become skilled at detecting propaganda, recognizing manipulation, and identifying agendas that aren't immediately obvious. The loneliness that comes with independent thinking is real and shouldn't be minimized. Humans are social creatures, and isolation can be genuinely painful. But there's a crucial difference between being alone and being lonely. Those who successfully leave the herd often find that quality relationships, based on mutual respect for independent thinking, are far more fulfilling than quantity relationships based on shared conformity. Moreover, independence attracts other independent thinkers. While you may lose connections with those who need you to think like them, you gain connections with those who value you precisely because you think different. These relationships, while fewer in number, tend to be deeper, more honest, and more mutually beneficial than relationships based on shared delusions. The creative implications of leaving the herd are enormous. Creativity requires the ability to see beyond conventional boundaries, to question assumptions, and to explore possibilities that others haven't considered. The herd mentality is fundamentally anti-creative because it rewards staying within established parameters rather than exploring new territory. When you free yourself from the need to conform to popular expectations, your creative potential explodes. You're no longer limited by what others think is possible, appropriate, or valuable. You can pursue ideas that seem crazy to conventional thinkers, but may represent breakthrough innovation. History's greatest creators were almost always people who left the herd to pursue visions that seemed impossible to their contemporaries. This creative freedom also applies to how you structure your life. Instead of following predetermined scripts for education, career, relationships, and lifestyle, you can design your existence around your actual values and objectives. This customization of life according to personal vision rather than social expectation is perhaps the greatest benefit of independent thinking. But Machiavelli warns us that this freedom must be protected constantly. The forces that profit from herd mentality never stop trying to recapture those who have escaped. They use shame, fear, promises of acceptance, and threats of continued isolation to try to pull independent thinkers back into line. Recognizing these manipulation tactics and developing immunity to them is crucial for maintaining your psychological independence. The spiritual dimension of leaving the herd is often overlooked, but equally important. Most organized belief systems are designed to discourage individual spiritual exploration in favor of collective adherence to established doctrines. When you leave the herd mentally, you often find yourself questioning spiritual assumptions as well, which can be both liberating and terrifying. This spiritual independence allows you to develop a personal relationship with whatever you consider sacred or meaningful, without the mediation of institutional authority. While this can be isolating initially, it often leads to a deeper, more authentic spiritual life than is possible within the constraints of collective religious thinking. The political implications are equally profound. Democratic systems are theoretically based on informed individual choice, but in practice they often rely on herd behavior and mass manipulation. Independent thinkers represent both the ideal of democratic participation and its greatest threat ideal because they make informed decisions, threatening because they can't be easily controlled through mass propaganda. This creates a complex relationship with political systems. Independent thinkers often see through political theater and manipulation more clearly than others, but they also struggle to find authentic representation in systems designed around mass appeal rather than principled leadership. The solution often involves developing political strategies that work outside traditional party structures and mass movements. The psychological warfare that independent thinkers face is constant and sophisticated. Gaslighting, making someone question their own perceptions, insanity, is a primary weapon used against those who see through collective delusion. When your observations conflict with accepted narratives, the typical response isn't to address your concerns, but to suggest that your perception itself is flawed. Learning to trust your own judgment despite this psychological pressure is crucial for maintaining independence. This doesn't mean becoming arrogant or dismissive of other perspectives, but it does mean developing confidence in your ability to analyze information and reach conclusions without requiring social validation. The educational implications are particularly important for those with children. Traditional educational systems are designed to produce conformist workers who follow instructions rather than independent thinkers who question authority. Parents who have left the herd face difficult decisions about how to raise children who can think independently while still functioning in society. This often requires supplementing traditional education with critical thinking skills, encouraging questioning rather than blind acceptance, and modeling independent behavior rather than just teaching it. The goal is to raise children who can navigate social systems without being enslaved by them. Machiavelli also understood that timing matters when leaving the herd. Abrupt departure often triggers stronger defensive responses than gradual separation. Those who successfully maintain their independence often do so by slowly reducing their dependence on group approval, while building alternative sources of validation, support, and security. This strategic approach to independence requires patience and planning. It means building skills and resources while still participating in conventional systems, gradually reducing your vulnerability to social and economic pressure, and carefully selecting when and how to reveal your actual thinking to others. The networking aspect of independence is crucial but often misunderstood. While independent thinkers may reject traditional networking based on mutual backscratching and artificial relationships, they often develop sophisticated networks based on shared values, complementary skills, and mutual respect for autonomy. These networks, while smaller, tend to be more reliable and valuable than conventional professional networks. The key is learning to identify other independent thinkers and building relationships based on authenticity rather than utility. This requires developing the ability to spot genuine independence versus performative nonconformity, which is often just another form of herd behavior disguised as rebellion. Technology has both helped and hindered independent thinking. On one hand, it provides access to information and perspectives that were previously unavailable, allowing people to form opinions based on broader input than ever before. On the other hand, algorithmic filtering and social media echo chambers can create new forms of herd mentality that feel like independence but are actually sophisticated forms of manipulation. Successful independent thinkers learn to use technology as a tool for accessing diverse information, while avoiding its tendency to create comfortable bubbles of confirmation bias. This requires conscious effort to seek out challenging perspectives and maintain exposure to ideas that conflict with your current thinking. The health implications of leaving the herd are both positive and negative. On the positive side, reducing conformity stress and living according to your authentic values typically reduces anxiety and increases overall life satisfaction. Making decisions based on your actual needs rather than social expectations usually leads to better physical and mental health outcomes. However, the stress of social isolation and constant vigilance against manipulation can take its toll. Independent thinkers must actively work to maintain their physical and mental health, without relying on traditional support systems that may not understand or support their lifestyle choices. Financial independence becomes crucial for those who leave the herd because economic dependence on systems that require conformity creates constant pressure to abandon independent thinking. This doesn't necessarily mean becoming wealthy, but it does mean developing income streams that don't depend on institutional approval or adherence to conventional thinking. This often requires developing multiple skills, building diverse income sources, and creating value in ways that aren't easily replaced by conformist alternatives. The goal is to become so valuable that your independence becomes an asset rather than a liability in your professional life. The romantic and family implications of independent thinking are complex and often painful. Relationships that were based on shared conformity may not survive the transition to independence. Partners who need you to think like everyone else may become uncomfortable with your evolution, leading to difficult decisions about whether relationships can adapt or must end. Building romantic relationships as an independent thinker requires finding partners who value authenticity over conformity, who can handle uncertainty and unconventional approaches to life, and who have their own independent thinking rather than simply adopting yours. These relationships, while challenging to find, tend to be far more satisfying than those based on shared conformity. The legacy implications are also worth considering. Those who successfully leave the herd and build independent lives often inspire others to question their own conformity. This ripple effect can extend far beyond your immediate circle, contributing to broader cultural evolution toward greater individual freedom and responsibility. However, this influence must be exercised carefully. Trying to convert others to independent thinking often backfires, triggering defensive responses that strengthen their attachment to herd mentality. The most effective approach is usually to live authentically and let others draw their own conclusions about the value of independence. Machiavelli's ultimate message about leaving the herd is paradoxical. True independence requires understanding dependence. You must understand how systems of control work, how herd mentality functions, and how social pressure operates in order to effectively resist. This isn't about becoming antisocial or rejecting all cooperation. It's about choosing your dependencies consciously rather than accepting them unconsciously. The goal isn't to eliminate all social connection or institutional participation, but to engage with these systems from a position of strength rather than weakness. When you understand the game being played, you can choose your level of participation without being victimized by unconscious manipulation. This conscious choice extends to every aspect of life. Instead of automatically accepting social norms, you evaluate them based on their actual value to your objectives. Instead of following career paths because they're expected, you choose work that aligns with your values and utilizes your strengths. Instead of adopting beliefs because they're popular, you develop convictions based on evidence and experience. The transformation from herd member to independent thinker is ultimately a transformation from victim to agent. Victims react to circumstances created by others, while agents create circumstances that others react to. This shift in orientation changes everything about how you experience life and interact with the world. But perhaps the most important insight from Machiavelli's perspective is that leaving the herd isn't a destination, it's a practice. Independence must be maintained daily through conscious choices, constant vigilance, and ongoing development of the skills and resources that make autonomy possible. The forces that benefit from your conformity never stop trying to recapture you. Social pressure, economic dependence, emotional manipulation, and psychological warfare are constant features of the landscape for independent thinkers. Success requires not just initially breaking free, but continuously maintaining and strengthening your independence over time. This ongoing practice of independence becomes a source of deep satisfaction and meaning. Instead of living according to scripts written by others, you become the author of your own story. Instead of reacting to agendas set by others, you pursue objectives that matter to you. Instead of hoping for approval from others, you develop the internal compass that guides your decisions. The price of this independence is eternal vigilance, but the reward is a life lived on your own terms. For those brave enough to pay that price, leaving the herd isn't just an act of rebellion, it's an act of self-creation. And in a world full of followers, those who think for themselves don't just survive, they shape the future. Remember, the choice to leave the herd isn't made once. It's made every day, in every decision, in every moment when you choose authentic thinking over social approval. The question isn't whether you're brave enough to leave the herd once,
but whether you're strong enough to stay gone. Because in the end, those who control their own minds control their own destiny, while those who let others think for them will always be at the mercy of forces beyond their control. The path of independence is narrow and difficult, but it's the only path that leads to genuine freedom. Everything else is just a more comfortable form of slavery.